We would like to thank your sponsor, Valley First, a division of First West Credit Union and a member-owned financial cooperative serving the Okanagan, Similkameen, and Thompson regions. They offer a wide range of banking and investment services for individuals and families. Valley First also has a talented business and commercial team to provide the expertise, products, and services local businesses need to grow and thrive.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Business Matters presented by Valley First, a division of First West Credit Union, where we delve into the stories and insights of leaders and change makers in our community. I'm your host, Rob Capello, and today we're joined by Ester Pike. Esther, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. So, Esther, you're the founder and CEO of Fledge Solutions. You work under the Action Edge Executive Development umbrella. And with Fledge Solutions, you're a company dedicated to enhancing business performance by focusing on the most valuable asset, which is people. Imagine that. So we want to dive into a little bit of your journey and what you're doing today. So I'm curious. I like to start kind of going back. So I was reading your profile and it says you started your professional journey at 17 coming to Kelowna. So I'm curious, what was that? Like, what was that entrepreneurial journey looking like? And what did you want to do when you grew up? Like, you're 17, you're like, man, when I grow up, I'm going to be this. Like, what did that look like?
Oh, wow. Well, if you really want to go far back enough, the first job I ever wanted to have was to be a garbage man. So I think I've grown out of that phase of my life. When I hit 17, I had actually started working just my first foray into full-time work in a structured environment. It was with Dees Bottle Depot here in Kelowna, up in Rutland, and that was 6 years I spent there. It was my first real adult job. And the reason that I say that my professional life started there was because looking back on it now, maybe I wasn't aware of it at the time, but looking back on it now, it was such a valuable learning experience for me in being able to understand the importance that your profession and the things that you do on a daily basis truly have an impact on your life. I started, like I said, in just the kind of customer service, figuring my way out around the till and what customer service really means, moved my way up to key holder and management and working in the back, organizing, shipping, receiving. There were a lot of hats that I ended up wearing in that particular company. And it did inspire me towards my educational path, which ended up being psychology and eventually a specialization in business psychology. So I think I'll always be grateful for that experience, and shout out to Claire and Kara over there for guiding me along the way as a little teen.
So what sparked what sparked your interest in psychology, occupational psychology, an aspect of business? Like what was it about what you were doing there? Like, oh geez, this is something I want to go down.
It was a mix of two things. I think I always had a bit of an inclination towards it. I remember when I was younger, I didn't want to be read fairy tales. I always asked my mom to read the encyclopedia to me before bed, and it would always be the section about the brain was the part that I was fascinated about. So I think there's always been something there that's just kind of grown with me. But particularly in that job and that aspect, once I started getting more responsibility, I realized how subtle changes in the way that I approached the people that I was responsible for, the people that I was leading, and even the customers to a certain extent, and managing up. So the way that I would talk to my bosses had such a profound impact on their daily experience in the work environment, and subsequently the way that they ended up showing up at home to a certain extent. Because one of the key parts that I always focus on is we're not just changing things for people at work. When people are satisfied at work, then they don't bring that home. They have more energy with their families, with their friends, with their external activities. All around, we're really changing lives. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, what drew me most to it. It was something I was good at, and it was something I was interested in.
So how did that, so you went through that path, and I know we'll talk about sort of, you've worked in other leadership roles and, community organization and so forth, but what was the moment that led sort of the spark that was like, I'm going to start my own company, Fledge Solutions, and then we'll talk about how it led into what you're doing today. But when did that happen? Like, where did you say, like, I'm going to do my own thing?
Gosh, I have to say, I pretty much just accidentally opened my own company. It was honestly, I was working at the time. I believe it was at the YMCA.
Yeah.
And it was in a nonprofit role. I was the EA for Sharon Peterson, who was the CEO at the time. And I was also working on the administrative side of their fundraising division.
Mm.
So a lot of the work that I was doing was
Right.
grant focused and related. And one of the board directors had recommended me to another organization at the time and asked, "Hey, I see that you're really good at this. Do you mind helping out?" So I did, but then that turned into not just assistance with the fund development side and turned into assistance with just growing, this
Right.
small grassroots nonprofit into something that is a little bit more structured, recognizable, functions well, has a job description, has a structure, has, governance and all of those things. So um, once that happened, I got recommended again to another local organization, and it just kind of spiraled from there. And I got caught basically just saying, "Oh, I should probably start actually making this legitimate." And it's not just a side hustle anymore that I'm just kind
Right.
of keeping as a part of my extra income, but actually something that started running away from me quite quickly, if I'm honest.
Interesting. So tell us about Fledge Solutions and maybe the connection with Active Edge as well. So if you can tell us about the services you provide for businesses.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So my company is called Fledge Solutions,
Yep.
and this is I've like I said, I've held it for about four, coming up on 5 years now. Action Edge Executive Development is an umbrella organization that I subcontract under. So the joy that I find in working with them in particular is I get to retain my independence. We're all independent contractors who work with them, but there's still a structure that we get to work under. We get to work as a team, and we get to bring all of our different expertises in. And I think kudos to Jared and Kevin who've grown the organization. They've really brought together a fantastic group of individuals who have different areas of expertise. So
Right.
one of the reasons that I was approached was because of my background in business psychology. It was something that was seen as potentially useful in a lot of
Yep.
the work that they were doing. And the Okanagan was definitely growing in terms of the
Mhm.
client pool. And I just happened to be here. So I kind of function under multiple hats all the time to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, regardless of what hat I'm wearing, a lot of it will depend on, okay, what is the business looking for? What is the extent of the project? Is this, something that would require, a little bit more of a national
Right.
perspective, so
A
to
little bit
speak?
more bench strength that you need to bring in. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because there's only so much that I can bring. And if
Yeah.
I can bring a team along with me, then that's even better.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm curious. I mentioned that you've been in various various leadership roles, and you've been actively involved in the community organization. So I'm curious if you can speak a little bit of how those experiences have shaped your approach today. Like, what can you draw
Mm.
on some things that are like, yeah, like being in those roles has helped me now today when I'm sitting in a boardroom with someone, or if I'm sitting with a company, a sole proprietor. Like, how has that helped?
Oh yeah, 100%. I have to say every single experience that I've had with every single organization has taught me something that
Right.
I now take with me as I move on. I think my first experience in a nonprofit was with the Red Cross. It was on a volunteer basis originally, and I've said this before in interviews as well. My apartment caught fire, and I got help by the Red Cross, which was kind of astounding to me because I
Mm.
had such a skepticism around nonprofits previously. So I decided to give back because I was helped so fantastically by that organization on a local level. And I think that for, particularly with those positions that I held, I grew my skill set quite a lot. It was an area where I could branch out my learnings and actually apply my degree to
Right.
practice a lot more. So I started just at reception a little bit, and then there was a growing structuring for what's called the volunteer and customer support service, which started here in the Okanagan kind of, and then it grew to be regional, and then it grew to be provincial, and then I'm pretty sure that the structure ended up growing to be national. So I'm pretty happy to have been a part of that journey and process. I also transitioned into working remote human resources for the Syrian refugee crisis and the Fort McMurray fires that were happening at the time. So that gave me a fantastic perspective of what people can and are willing to do for absolutely free. These are
Right.
all volunteers. You know, the Red Cross is, I think it's 86% of the time volunteer based. And that pushed me into really having a big interest in what intrinsic motivation truly looks like. Because I noticed that the people who are just volunteering for the Red Cross put in so much effort and so much work and seemed so much happier than some of my colleagues who were being paid for the jobs that they were
Right.
doing. And I just found that so fascinating. And I started my research once I hit my master's, actually focused specifically on that, was in nonprofits, the role that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation plays in people's job satisfactions. And it's immense. You know,
Interesting.
we talk about this concept of a you know, when people start complaining about things like hours and pays and work,
Right.
those are the extrinsic motivators, right? Well,
Right.
that's the hygiene factor. That's actually usually, from my experience, and sometimes it's not, sometimes it's a legitimate concern, but usually it's actually an indication that they are unhappy about some sort of intrinsic aspects of the job.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's something else, right, that causes
Yes.
that. Interesting. I'm curious. I was looking at the website on from Fledge, is that one
Hmm.
of the things that it said is, you do an organizational audits. And
Yes.
I'm curious if you could just, what that means, what that looks like, what that process looks like, and sort of what you get out of that, like what the end, sort of the benefits that you get from that.
Yes, that particular part of my service is something that came about as a result of a mistake I made fairly early on in my career. I again got recommended for to help out with an organization, and they said they needed one thing, and I just trusted them at the word.
Jumped in.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly where I kind of made that mistake of, oh, I probably should have done my due diligence first to figure out whether the execs and CEO actually had a clear understanding of what was truly going on, as opposed to just taking them on their word. So I designed this entire intervention for their staff, which ended up being fairly useless to a certain extent.
Right.
On the fly, had to turn it around to a certain extent. But organizational audits, it sounds scary, but really it's just me taking a look at three very specific parts. It's the people, the product or service, and then the process, right? Because at some level, whatever it is that an organization is experiencing, it will be on one of those three levels that there needs to be some sort of work being done, right? You can have the appropriate structures being put in place, but you don't have the right bums in the right seats, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you're not really playing to the people that you have, you're not playing to their strengths. On the other side, I've also been in an organization where the group is fantastic, the teamwork is great, the culture is really, really good, but the way that the structure and the system and the process is set up is just really hurting them, right? So those are the kinds of things that I try to investigate through that organizational audit, and to a certain extent, I do insist on it before I bring any sort of intervention in.
Yeah, I use that analogy. I've read this somewhere in a book. Is like going to, when our medical system's working. It was going to a doctor, right? They should analyze. If you just go in and say, they're not just, they shouldn't just take your word and go. The ideas are going to give you an assessment and then give you a prescription of what it is. And I kind of use that. I think that's what the analogy you're using. I thought that was interesting. So
Yes,
um,
definitely.
I saw another word on there. I was curious, or another phrase is psychometric assessments.
Yes.
What's a psychometric assessment?
Okay, so here we go. Down into the rabbit hole of my profession. So occupational psychology is business psychology is the easiest way that I can describe it. It's
Okay.
the psychology of people in the workplace, right? So that's on an individual level, on a group level, kind of sociology, psychology all together mixed in for a very specific environment.
Right.
And there are five main categories, so to speak, that this comes out in. It's leadership, engagement, and motivation. That's the one. You
Yeah.
have work design, organizational change and development. That's the second. Well-being at work, and this includes things like what's called ergonomic functioning. So things like lighting and the way that the layout of the office is. Do people actually have a good feeling when they're walking into the space? Learning, training, and development always. And then the fifth one is psychometric assessments, and these are I like to call it a tool. I have a specialization in it. It's a separate license, and it allows me to use psychometric assessments as a tool when I walk into an organization. The easiest way to describe it, and I think most businesses and people, professionals, will have had experience with, like a Myers-Briggs or a Four Colors or a DISC assessment, or, there's so many of them out there, strengths finders, right? And these are the most commonly known ones. My license allows me to administer and, to a certain extent, create custom ones for whatever needs are required.
Mm.
But what I really, really want to always make sure when I'm walking into an organization and suggesting a psychometric assessment of any kind, that they understand that it's a tool. And one of
Right.
the biggest unfortunate things that I see in businesses that have tried going down the assessment route is they see it as a definition. They see it as a definition of themselves. This is now my color. This is my number. This is my title. This is my whatever. And it ends up being counterproductive. The point of psychometric assessment is to provide a common language. That's it. It's trying to conceptualize something that is actually really hard to define sometimes and categorize it to a certain extent. It is not meant to be a label, because at the end of the day, what I have seen happen in some organizations is that they'll stick their color on their desk or on their office door and use it almost as an excuse for their behavior.
Right.
And now you've just perpetuated an issue that you were trying to get rid of in the first place. So it's quite a delicate area that I do like to be in, but I have some pet peeves about.
So how do you balance, or how do you handle then that resistance to change with an organization? So you must, like, from you walking in as a consultant and
Mhm.
or you're analyzing, you're doing an audit, you're coming back, and then the staff, like, then the other part is like, now you got to implement it and you got to execute on it. So how do you handle, like, because I think some people, I shouldn't say it all because I don't want to
Mhm.
be in the same brush, are resistant to change. Well, we've been doing it like
Mhm.
this forever. Who are you to tell me that I need to change? So how do you handle that part?
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because you did use kind of that doctor-patient analogy, and it is absolutely something that it's one of the methodologies that we use in any form of consulting or coaching. But there's three, really. The first one is kind of that expert perspective. It's when you come in and I'll tell you what to do. Sometimes you got to pull that out. Not
Yeah.
always. I don't recommend it. The doctor-patient one feels a little bit better, but it can sometimes put you in a position where you still get that resistance, because
Right.
there isn't really a sense of being convinced that the solution that you're providing is actually going to do much of a difference.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really like to focus on is what's called a process focused methodology of any sort of consulting, and that means making sure that you're asking the right questions first. A lot of my clients will try to rush to a solution way too early, and they'll press me for an answer very quickly because they're looking for some sort of solution. But I cannot truly provide any sort of accurate
Right.
suggestion until I get to the bottom of what's truly going on. And that's why that so-called diagnostic process
Yeah.
is so critical and important. The way that I get about the resistance of it is I try to get down to the root cause of the pain point.
Mm.
And if I can fully understand what my client is going through first, before trying to determine what should be done, there tends to be more buy-in, because now you're speaking their language. You understand what's going on. And it's not meant to be a hierarchical process. I'm not the expert coming into this organization telling you what you should be doing because I'm smarter than you. It's a collaborative process. I don't know your business as well as you do. I don't live it every day. I come in with a certain external perspective, but I can't work that unless you provide me with your internal one. So the second that you establish that relationship first, it becomes much easier, right? And of course, you're always going to have resistance.
For sure.
But at the end of the day, the benefits of going through the terrible, sucky process of any sort of change implementation, which is always going to happen,
Yeah.
the benefits have to make sense, and they have to outweigh that, and they have to be temporary and not permanent, right?
So I mean, I guess it's part of it is the foundational how it's introduced to the team as well. Like if you
Very
do
much.
setting the expectations, it makes it easier when you're walking in. So on that, then how do you balance like the business objectives of an owner, let's say, or of a company, and then the well-being of its staff? Like, how do you, because I could see, you know, sometimes, and maybe you say, well, I don't work with those type of organizations, but if it's an organization that, you know, sometimes is bottom line driven, how do you balance the two? How do you make sure that you're balancing the two of those?
If I'm honest, I love working with those organizations the most because most often it's where I'm most needed.
Mm.
I think that as a society, we've gotten a little bit better at understanding the need and the necessity for ensuring that our staff have a certain standard of well-being in the workplace. Um, for individuals who are very quantitatively minded and very business bottom line driven, there's a plethora of research that I can pull out that shows exactly how important making sure that you have satisfied staff is to your
Mm.
bottom line.
Mm.
Because when you have a revolving door of staff, when you have staff that is no longer actually fully present in the workplace,
Right, right.
when you have staff that are sometimes even actively going against what it is that you're working, do you really think that you're going to achieve your bottom line? No, you're not. So, you know, the business at the end of the day is only as good as the people in it. And
Yeah.
I've seen businesses both flourish and fail specifically because of the people that were in it and how the dynamics ended up just falling into place without any sort of guidance. So there's sometimes, you know, a process of having to not explain that. I don't like to use the word explain, but to provide a little bit of perspective of exactly how important this is to the bottom line. One of the things that I will say, that I'm very happy about is that my own career journey originally started with a very high functioning nonprofit, and it was with the YMCA. And I feel very lucky to have had that experience because I worked very closely with the board to a certain extent because I was
Right.
an EA for the CEO. And then I was also very much kind of like down on the ground with the administrative aspect. So I got the full breadth, depth, and scope
Right.
of the organization. And it was a very high functioning board. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't have any other boards to really
Right.
compare to.
Right.
Uh, but it gave me an understanding of what it's supposed to look like and how it could function. And when I moved out of that, I realized nonprofits are really fantastic at doing the things and being very vision oriented and having that intrinsic motivation, but they need somebody at the end of the day who's going to provide that more business mindset. And that's usually the roles that I ended up falling into. I loved being able to support the staff in my organizations in a way that they could go out and do whatever they needed to do to achieve the mission that they needed to achieve, while I was in the background making sure that the scaffolding of the business, that the actual structure, that everybody's getting paid, that we have enough resources, that was all being met. And that's now what I bring to the table as well. I'm very bottom line driven to a certain extent as well, naturally.
Right.
But having had these experiences in nonprofit, I see the massive benefit that having a proper values driven organization that walks the talk is so critical to the success of a business in every way, shape, and form.
Interesting. And when you're working with an organization, um, do you typically stay on? Like I saw that, you know, there's workshops that you do, one-on-one coaching that you do. So is it typically strategy you implement, you hand over a blueprint and off you go? Or are you engaged with making sure, checking in, coaching, helping deliver on whatever change management or anything that you're actually recommending?
I would say it depends on the organization quite a bit and what their needs are.
Okay.
Personally, I do prefer the project-based work
Okay.
because it forces me to make sure that my service is at a level that I'm comfortable with leaving this organization to work on its own now. I
Right.
don't want to necessarily create a relationship where anybody is ever reliant on me.
Mm.
But so project based work is definitely something that I prefer because I would like the organization to understand that there is a way that they can do this themselves.
Right. Right.
But at the end of the day, there are certain things that you just kind of need somebody external all the time. And
Mm.
that's where the one-on-one coaching I think is key.
Mm.
When you get to a point where you're so high up the ladder that you're an executive or a CEO,
Yeah.
the air gets thin, you don't have very many peers, you end up not having very much of a sounding board. And there is, to a certain extent, a little bit of an expectation to have all of the answers. So it comes in handy to have somebody like me who's external, who's kind of gone through the process, understands what it means to be at that high level, to give you a little bit of a shove every once in a while. A lot
Yeah.
of what I do in one-on-one coaching is providing challenge, and providing accountability, because
Accountability.
nobody in their circle, in their immediate circle, is there to be able to provide that yet.
Fair enough. Interesting. I'm curious, is there any sort of high level recommendations on how, like if someone's listening, like enhancing employee well-being, is there some best practices you can give without, and I get everybody's different, 100% get that, but just you've done enough of these, like, is there things that businesses can implement that are, maybe enhance well-being or mental health in a workplace?
So one of the things that I will say is there are a plethora of resources for that out there. And if I were to truly take a proper step back and see what was the common thread that pulls through all of the organizations that have done it well, it was a genuine interest in betterment and a continuous understanding that it is an ever-changing process.
Right.
You're always going to have to keep on top of it, and you're always going to have to try to maneuver and figure out what the best way to serve your people are. I would never say that there was a specific intervention or a specific methodology that worked better than most. Half the time, the organizations that I would perceive to be the most successful have made many mistakes along the way. But the point is that they tried, and when they made a mistake, they owned up to it, and the staff genuinely appreciated it. The word authenticity gets thrown out a lot, and
Right.
it's turned into a little bit of a buzzword, same as resilience, same as,
Yeah.
toxic culture, and there's
Yeah.
so many buzzwords that end up getting thrown out. But a true feeling of authenticity really does come from genuine care. And your staff and the people that you work with will always be able to forgive you, so to speak, for any sort of potential, mistakes or falling off the path, as long as you're willing to continue improving and you're willing to own up to it, because you're setting that standard right from the get-go. And then all of a sudden they feel comfortable in admitting their own mistakes. And as a business owner, you sure as hell want your staff to be admitting when they've made a mistake, right? So it's that kind of environment of trust is what I would say is the key common thread to any sort of workplace well-being.
Interesting. Love it. So I want to end on sort of where do you want to go with this? Like, where's sort of the vision for yourself, and you picture yourself 3 or 5 years down the road? Like, where do you see Ester?
Oh gosh, in a similar spot, I guess, still working in the same function that I am right now. I would like to touch more Okanagan businesses, I would say. I my current roster is wide. A lot of the companies that I work for are sometimes extra provincial or they're national.
Right.
And I have a couple of local organizations that I am working for at the moment. But, I don't know if I should say selfishly, but selfishly to a certain extent, this community is the one that grew me. This
Right.
community is the one that has really helped shape me and turn me into who I am. The opportunities that I was provided, the chances that were taken on me as a younger professional growing up within my career. I want to have the opportunity to be able to give back to the local organizations that have truly helped to shape that, because I think that Kelowna is a very unique community. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the Lower Mainland.
Right.
And I didn't think community existed until I came here. So it's something that I want to, in whatever way I can, continue to cultivate as best as I can.
Well, that's a great message to end with. I love it. So, Ester, thank you for spending some time sharing your journey and the impactful work you're doing with businesses here. And always, I get value whenever time we talk. So thank you for sharing some of the stuff in our conversation. Really enjoyed it.
No, it was a privilege. Thank you so much, Rob.
No problem. For listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and share the podcast with your friends. And for any feedback, suggestions, please free to reach out to us. Until next time, thank you for tuning into Business Matters, and have a great day.
We would like to thank your sponsor, Valley First, a division of First West Credit Union and a member-owned financial cooperative serving the Okanagan, Similkameen, and Thompson regions. They offer a wide range of banking and investment services for individuals and families. Valley First also has a talented business and commercial team to provide the expertise, products, and services local businesses need to grow and thrive.